The proposed urgent debate on the human rights situation in Belarus is now more needed than ever. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and I give the floor to Spain.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Spain supports what was said by the EU after the elections in Belarus on the 9th of August. We hear things that concern us: tortures, mass detention, ill treatment in prison or disappearances are among some of the human rights violations committed by the Belarusian authorities and documented by civil society. Furthermore, limitations to freedom of press and expression means that journalists cannot do their job, and the voice of human rights defenders is silenced, not only physically but also through social networks that have been cut, that have been interrupted. People who disappeared, we don't know about their whereabouts. All of this on the first, all this was Ms. Marin, the Special Rapporteur on Belarus, on the 1st of September, spoke out against this as well, together with other Special Rapporteurs. The Human Rights Council cannot remain passive. It has the moral obligation to act pursuant to its mandate and fulfilling its role of being a prevention mechanism. For these reasons, Spain firmly supports the request of the EU to have an urgent debate on the human rights situation in Belarus. We appeal to other member states of the Human Rights Council to support this request and to actively be involved in the urgent debate. Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much to you, says the President.
I can see no other delegation wishing to take the floor at this stage, so I will now give the floor to the country concerned, Belarus. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. The government of Belarus considers it unacceptable to have a proposal from the European Union of urgent debates to discuss the current human rights situation in our country. I have no time at the moment to answer all of the various accusations brought before us, and so I would like to limit myself to this at the current time. Unfortunately, we are seeing yet another case of a manipulation of the Council by a specific group of states with a specific goal in mind in a situation that does not require intervention by the Council. At the presidential elections of 2020, the current head of state, Alexander Lukashenko, was victorious, and he received the corresponding congratulations from the heads of China, Russia, Kazakhstan, and many other states. Part of our society was not in agreement with these events. As a result, following the presidential elections, there were events in our country in August of 2020 which were highly politicized and saw a high level of political activity by citizens. In the capital and in certain other states, street protests have been taking place. To a significant degree, their initiation, coordination, and even tactical operation is implemented via the social networks, telegram channels, administered from abroad. It is not always the case, particularly in the first days after the election, that these protests were peaceful or indeed remain peaceful. This has and continues to trigger the appropriate reactions from law enforcement. Unfortunately, and it is very sad, that some people have suffered, both protesters and employees of law enforcement agencies have been injured. In all cases where there were clashes between protesters and law enforcement, we have conducted checks and verifications. Some law enforcement decisions still need to be taken and implemented. The political leadership of the government and the government are working on a proposal to update the Belarus constitution and considering how to organize a national dialogue in order to overcome the political standoff that is formed within our society. Work is being done also to restore national harmony within the country. The proposal of the European Union on urgent debates at the Council are a part of a broad political campaign organized by the European Union in order to support political forces in Belarus who lost the elections and to force the authorities of Belarus to review once again the results of the election. The European Union openly calls for the losing political parties to be supported and for political and financial support to be rendered to the citizens of Belarus. In this way, the European Union is creating the conditions for preserving this political standoff in the society of Belarus. The proposal of the European Union has nothing to do with human rights. It is, however, aimed at rendering political pressure against the state of Belarus, which is a form of direct intervention in the domestic affairs of a sovereign state and is a gross violation of international law. The debates proposed by the European Union will create a dangerous precedent in the Council of intervention in the electoral processes of a specific country. Madam President, the initiative of the European Union is deeply in dissonance with the practices of the Human Rights Council, which in practice have not used urgent debates to review a number of actual humanitarian catastrophes in the world, both in the past and now. These catastrophes have included the deaths of hundreds and thousands of people, hundreds and even thousands, immense numbers of displaced persons have been involved. The current human rights situation in Belarus does not provide sufficient grounds for urgent or planned and timetabled debates in the Human Rights Council. If the European Union does still wish to discuss the issue of Belarus, then that can be done as a part of the consideration of regular agenda items. In conclusion, I would like to underscore that the Belarus people and the government have all the resources and institutions which are required to independently resolve the goals of our own political development. This concerns also the goals of ending the current political standoff. External pressure and intervention, including using the United Nations organization, are totally counterproductive. And they will only harm our goal of promoting social harmony. We call on the members of the Council to reject the proposal of the European Union to hold an urgent debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So if I understood correctly, and I'm turning to Venezuela, Venezuela is in objection to the proposal by Germany on behalf of the members of the European Union, which are members of the Council as well, to hold an urgent debate, which means that we have to take action. And I repeat, at this stage, only members of the Council will be able to take the floor. We will follow the standard procedure for voting in the Council. However, regrettably, as you know, we don't have the voting machine that is in room 20 at our disposal here, so we have to do it the old-fashioned way and conduct the vote by roll call vote. I now give the floor to members of the Council wishing to make explanations of vote before the vote on the proposal by Germany on behalf of member states of the European Union that are member states of the Human Rights Council as well, to hold an urgent debate on the situation of human rights in Belarus. I do not see anybody raising their flag. So at the request of the delegation of Venezuela, the Council will now proceed to a roll call vote on the proposal to hold an urgent debate on the situation of human rights in Belarus. The question to be answered will be as follows. Do you agree to hold an urgent debate on the situation of human rights in Belarus? Those in favor should vote yes. Those against should vote no. The roll call shall be conducted in English and in the English alphabetic order of names of the Council members, beginning with the member whose name I will now draw. The name of each member state shall be called and its representative shall reply yes, no, or abstention. And I will give the floor to the Secretary who will proceed with the conduct of the roll call vote. But now I will start by drawing the country to start with. And that is Spain. So I now hand over to the Secretariat to please conduct the roll call vote.
Therefore, the roll call vote will begin with Spain. Spain. Spain, yes. The Sudan.
Abstention.
Sudan, abstention. Togo.
Abstention.
Togo, abstention. Ukraine.
Yes.
Ukraine, yes. Uruguay. Uruguay, yes. Venezuela. Venezuela, no. Afghanistan.
Yes.
Afghanistan, yes. Angola.
Abstention.
Angola, abstention. Argentina.
Yes.
Argentina, yes. Armenia.
Abstention.
Armenia, abstention. Australia.
Australia, yes.
Australia, yes. Austria.
Yes.
Austria, yes. The Bahamas.
Bahamas, yes.
The Bahamas, yes. Bahrain.
Abstention.
Bahrain, abstention. Bangladesh. Bangladesh, abstention. Brazil.
Brazil, yes.
Brazil, yes. Bulgaria.
Yes.
Bulgaria, yes. Burkina Faso.
Abstention.
Burkina Faso, abstention. Cameroon.
Cameroun, abstention.
Cameroon, abstention. Chile.
Chile, yes.
Chile, yes. Czech Republic.
Yes.
Czech Republic, yes. Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Abstention.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo, abstention. Denmark.
Yes, from Denmark.
Denmark, yes. Eritrea.
Eritrea, abstention.
Eritrea, abstention. Fiji.
Yes.
Fiji, yes. Germany.
Germany, yes.
Germany, yes. India.
Abstention.
India, abstention. Indonesia.
Abstention.
Indonesia, abstention. Italy. Italy, yes. Japan.
Yes.
Japan, yes. Libya,
Yes.
Libya, yes. Marshall Islands,
Marshall Islands, yes.
Marshall Islands, yes. Mauritania,
Mauritanie, abstention.
Mauritania, abstention. Mexico,
Yes.
Mexico, yes. Namibia,
Namibia abstention.
Namibia, abstention. Nepal,
All abstentions.
Nepal, abstention. The Netherlands,
The Netherlands, yes.
Netherlands, yes. Nigeria,
Nigeria abstention.
Nigeria, abstention. Pakistan,
Abstention.
Pakistan, abstention. Peru,
Yes.
Peru, yes. The Philippines,
No.
Philippines, no. Poland,
Poland, yes.
Poland, yes. Qatar,
امتناع.
Abstention.
abstention. Republic of Korea,
Republic of Korea, yes.
Republic of Korea, yes. Senegal,
No.
Senegal, abstention. Slovakia,
Yes.
Slovakia, yes. Lastly, Somalia,
Somalia, abstention.
Somalia, abstention. This concludes the roll call vote, Madam President.
The voting is now closed. And the result is 25 votes in favor, 2 against, and 20 abstentions, which means that the proposal to hold an urgent debate on the human rights situation in Belarus is adopted. Let me now turn to the remainder of the program of work for the 45th session. We have 3.5 weeks ahead of us with 3 panel discussions and 19 interactive dialogues with special procedure mandate holders and expert mechanisms, 7 dialogues with international investigative mechanisms, 5 enhanced interactive dialogues, and 1 country-specific dialogue. The Council will also adopt 12 outcomes of the UPR. The general debate at the end of today will be on item 2. I would like to remind you that on the last day of the session, we shall proceed with the appointment of special procedure mandate holders, and the Council will also proceed with the election of 7 members of the Advisory Committee. As reflected in the minutes of the meeting of the 3rd of September, the Bureau considered the 2 letters from groups of states dated 31st of August, proposing that the Council hold a separate discussion under item 5 of the agenda on the issues addressed in those letters. These letters were immediately published on the HRC extranet upon receipt. The Bureau agreed to formally transmit the letters to the coordinating committee of the special procedures with the request to provide the Bureau with the committee's assessment and recommendations, as well as any additional information it deemed useful. Upon receipt of the coordinating committee's response, dated 8th of September, the Bureau met again to discuss the 2 letters dated 31st of August and their proposals. As reflected in the minutes of the meetings on the 9th of September, the Bureau considered the matter very carefully and highlighted the relevance of the internal procedures that already exist, including the Coordinating Committee's internal advisory procedure, which unfortunately is not very well known to everybody. The Bureau also welcomed that the committee had set out a process involving myself to work with the Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy and the states concerned over the next months. With regard to the question on when the members and observers of the Council may discuss this and other matters, as it were, related to the working methods of special procedures, the Bureau appreciated the Committee's willingness to organize the next conversation with states and other stakeholders in the weeks to come, that is to say, at an appropriate moment after this session. I myself will remain in contact with the Coordinating Committee on this matter. The Bureau additionally underscored that the general debate under item 5, which is scheduled to be held next week on the 25th of September, also provides an opportunity, if necessary, to discuss issues related to the special procedures. Against this backdrop, the Bureau's recommendation is therefore that the programme of work not be amended on this particular issue. I understand that the Russian Federation would like to be given the floor at this stage as one of the signatories of the two letters. With this in mind, I trust that the draft programme of work... Right now, okay. The Russian Federation has the floor.
Thank you very much, President. We consider as a compromise option the proposal that you offered of a dialogue with the Coordinating Committee for the Special Procedures after this session of the Council on issues on the activities of various experts, the code of behavior and the mandate entrusted to them. We consider that such a discussion could be more useful and indeed productive if it was organized during the current session of the Council. Document BRST 8/2 provides all of the legal foundations and justifications for this. We, however, would like also to thank you, Madam President, for the flexibility and effort that you have shown to find compromise outcomes to ensure that a dialogue does take place. We remain convinced that it has long been necessary to hold such a dialogue. It will make it possible to fully discuss the acute and topical issues which are mentioned in both letters, and also it will make it possible to prevent violations by the special procedures meant held in the future. Successful functioning of the entire special procedures mechanism requires, at the end of the day, respect and unswerving compliance with the code of behavior and the mandate. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As I said, we'll organize as proposed by the Coordinating Committee after the session. With this in mind, I trust that the draft programme of work may be approved with the understanding that it is an evolving document and that further adjustments may be required according to the progress of work. I see no objection to the programme of work, so I take it that the programme of work is therefore adopted. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as far as states are concerned, the online system for inscription on the list of speakers for all interactive dialogues, general debates and panel discussions opened on Tuesday, the 8th of September at 4 p.m. and closes 24 hours before the meeting in which the debate is scheduled to start. Once the online inscription has closed, delegations may still inscribe or withdraw, preferably by sending an email to the list of speakers desk rather than physically approaching the desk. The list of speakers will close approximately 15 minutes after the beginning of each debate, as usual. The online system for inscription on the list of speakers for UPR outcome adoptions will open on Monday, the 21st of September at 9 a.m. and close on Thursday, the 24th of September at 6 p.m. As you know, no inscriptions will be possible after this deadline. For non-governmental organizations, the list of speakers for all debates taking place during the session opened online on Tuesday, the 8th September at 2 p.m. as announced at the opening of the last session pursuant to paragraph 6 of President's Statement PRST 13/1, adopted on the 6th December 2019, no general debates were held during the Council's 44th session. Therefore, the reports and oral updates presented at the 44th session, but not considered in an interactive dialogue, may be discussed at this session during general debates under relevant agenda items. I would like to reiterate that all participants should please upload the electronic version of oral statements through the online system for the list of speakers or send them to the email address shown on the screen. I would also like to take this opportunity to strongly encourage all of you to respect the speaking time limits for all debates and to exercise self-restraint in the preparation of your statements. Along with the Vice Presidents, I will strive to ensure that meetings begin on time and that speaking time limits be strictly observed by everybody. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind you that the deadline for the submission of draft proposals to be adopted during the 45th session is set for Friday, the 25th of September at 1 p.m. An extension of the deadline for the submission of a draft proposal can be approved by the Human Rights Council under exceptional circumstances, one time only, for a maximum of 24 working hours. In this case, that would mean until Monday, the 28th September at 1 p.m. The submission of a proposal after the submission deadline needs prior approval by the Council before it is registered by the Secretariat. Let me also underline that in accordance with paragraphs 113 and 117 of Resolution 5/1, delegations are invited to conduct open-ended informal consultations to secure the broadest possible support for their initiatives. At least one informal open-ended consultation should be held on each draft resolution or decision before it is considered for action by the Council. In the interest of ensuring the effective participation of all stakeholders in the work of the Human Rights Council, I encourage main sponsors of draft proposals to share draft texts also with civil society organizations and other observers that follow informal consultations, and to organize virtual informal consultations or conduct rounds of consultation in writing. With regard to the accessibility of our work, I would like to remind you that there is a focal point for accessibility within the Secretariat, who can be contacted if necessary. I would also like to invite sponsors to consider requesting the accessibility of mandated panel discussions in their draft resolutions to ensure the provision of live captioning and sign language interpretation. In addition, delegations are requested to upload their oral statements in Word format so that they can be accessible to persons with disabilities. And please note that statements uploaded in non-accessible format will not be posted on the extranet. All representatives using a video statement are strongly encouraged to add captioning and provide a transcript of their video statements along with the videos. I wish to emphasize that the United Nations, including this Council, has a zero tolerance to any form of harassment, including sexual harassment. In this context, I would like to recall that the Director General has pledged to implement the Code of Conduct meant to prevent harassment, including sexual harassment at UN events here in Geneva, and that I have appointed a gender focal point to assist with the implementation of this in the Council. Any and all complaints will be dealt with promptly. We encourage the reporting of any incident directly to UN security officers. Let me also emphasize that maintaining a safe space for the active participation of representatives of civil society and national human rights institutions is not only part of the mandate of the Council, but also in our common interest. I will follow up on all delegations that I receive concerning acts of reprisal and intimidation that are carried out in connection with the Human Rights Council, its mechanisms and procedures. I call on everybody to take all necessary measures to prevent and ensure adequate protection against such acts. I thank you for your cooperation and for ensuring that this Council is a safe environment for all. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I now declare open Agenda Item 2, entitled Annual Report of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and Reports of the Office of the High Commissioner and the Secretary General. This agenda item will remain open throughout the session. We shall now proceed with the oral update by the High Commissioner and the oral updates of the situation on human rights in Nicaragua, pursuant to Council Resolution 43/2, and in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, pursuant to Resolution 42/4. Let me remind you that the general debate on these oral updates will begin this afternoon after the enhanced interactive dialogues on the human rights implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is now my honor to welcome Madame Michelle Bachelet, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, to present her oral updates. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Madam President, distinguished President, Excellencies, colleagues and friends. In a context of sharply escalating suffering and turmoil across the world, human rights principles, norms and actions offer effective solutions to build stronger resilience to shocks and counter despair by preventing social, economic and political instability. Policies that deliver universal and equal access to social protections and healthcare, institutions which promote respect for the views and rights of all members of society, and laws that require accountable policing and access to justice help to avert the escalation of tensions and grievances into violence and conflict. This human rights-based approach supports greater social and economic resilience. It is the foundation of prosperity and political stability, and it protects vulnerable people from the worst impacts of crisis. With COVID-19, a fast-moving and global health crisis has collided with many slower and more entrenched political, social, and economic crises around the world. And those multiple underlying fractures, which have made us more vulnerable to this virus and create entry points for its harms, result primarily from political processes that exclude people's voices and gaps in human rights protection. As international human rights bodies, and in line with the Secretary General's call to action for human rights, I believe it is the responsibility of both this Council and my office to promote those measures that will help states better protect the well-being of their peoples and to cooperate with states to ensure they fulfill their obligations in this regard. In many of the country situations I will outline this morning, I see important opportunities for us to assist states to devise human rights-based action that can de-escalate tensions, support sustainable development, and preserve people's well-being even at this challenging time. Later in the session, my office will discuss aspects of the following country situations: Cambodia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Georgia, Myanmar, Nicaragua, Sudan, Ukraine, Venezuela, and Yemen. Madam President, in Belarus, we continue to receive alarming reports of the ongoing violent repression of peaceful demonstrations by hundreds of thousands of people from every walk of life, notably women. Reports continue to indicate unnecessary or excessive use of force by law enforcement officials, thousands of arrests, many of them apparently arbitrary, and hundreds of allegations of torture or ill treatment, including against children, with some reports indicating sexual violence. Recently, abductions by unidentified individuals of people associated with the opposition have also been reported. Journalists reporting on the protests also continues to be targeted for arrest and harassment. There has been limited evidence of any steps by the authorities to address these reports. Re-establishing social peace in Belarus requires far-reaching dialogue, reforms, and accountability for grave human rights violations. I encourage the Council to focus action on these three areas to prevent further escalation of violence and grievances. Given their scale and number, all allegations of torture or other forms of ill treatment by the security forces should be documented and investigated with a view to bringing the perpetrators to justice. In Poland, I'm concerned about the continuing repression of LGBTI people and activists, including restrictions on the freedom of assembly, and the government's support for towns that have termed themselves, using unacceptable language, LGBTI-free zones. The scapegoating and targeting of a minority group for political purposes feeds intolerance and discrimination, damaging all of societies. Last week's fire at the migrant camp in Lesbos, Greece, has had drastic impact on the lives of thousands of people and underscores the need for solidarity and shared responsibility among EU member states. I encourage the European Commission and the EU member states to enhance genuine solidarity and strengthen human rights safeguards at EU external borders in the upcoming EU Pact on Migration and Asylum. Reports of pushbacks and collective expulsions at the sea and land borders of EU states in violation of legal obligation and with grave consequences for the lives and rights of migrants call for independent monitoring and verification. I recall to all countries their obligation to cooperate in ensuring that migrants' lives are protected and their human rights upheld regardless of their administrative status. Madam President, in Lebanon, compounded political, socio-economic and financial crises have persistently burdened the population, with reports indicating that more than 55% of the population is now trapped in poverty, almost double last year's rate. Against this backdrop, last month's explosion of chemicals warehoused in the port of Beirut has created additional destruction, devastating people's lives, livelihoods and hope. The additional heavy impacts of COVID-19, including multiple challenges in accessing basic health and education, have prompted an alarming exodus of young professionals, notably from the health sector, further draining the country of its most precious resources. It is critical that human rights principles be fully integrated into all efforts to rebuild from this tragedy. The authorities must empower individuals and communities to claim their rights and ensure their participation in decisions. Accountability for this tragedy will be vital, with an impartial, independent, thorough and transparent investigation into the explosion. Political actors must agree on and implement reforms aimed at preventing further erosion of rights to meaningfully address the grievances of the people and the country's underlying human rights gaps. In the occupied Palestinian territory, the escalating tragedy in Gaza is of particular concern. Although temporary truces are welcome, including the latest agreement to end hostilities between armed groups in Gaza and Israel, Gaza's 2 million people desperately need long-term and sustainable solutions. The blockade by sea and land, which Israel has imposed for 13 years, has brought Gaza's main economic and commercial activities to a complete halt. As a direct result, more than 38% of Gazans live in poverty. 50% are unemployed, and more than 90% of the water from aquifers is undrinkable. Last month's decision to ban the entry of fuel into Gaza creates even deeper suffering and humanitarian burdens. With sharply rising COVID-19 cases in Gaza, the health sector now faces total collapse unless aspects of the blockade are lifted. The blockade, which contravenes international law, has conclusively failed to deliver security or peace for Israelis and Palestinians and should urgently be lifted. In Iran, human rights defenders, including women's rights defenders, lawyers, labor rights activists and protesters continue to suffer intimidation, persecution and ill treatment. I remain concerned that political prisoners and prisoners of conscience have been excluded from Iran's temporary release of detainees in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm dismayed at the prolonged hunger strike of human rights lawyer Nasrin Sotoudeh. I urge the authorities to pursue many more temporary releases as an urgent public health measure and to immediately release political prisoners and prisoners of conscience. In Iraq, ongoing killings and attacks on activists and human rights defenders by armed groups without accountability are deeply worrying. Last month, a report by my office noted that the high number of human rights activists and protesters who remain missing, while others who have been located have reported torture and ill treatment. I encourage the government to move quickly on its stated commitment to establish a fact-finding commission to ensure accountability and prevent such actions in the future. Syria's people continue to face multiple and comprehensive crises. The pandemic has highlighted the devastation of a health system battered by deliberate bombings and other effects of conflict and ill-equipped to meet even basic needs. WFP reports that 9.3 million people in Syria face food insecurity. These economic challenges are amplified by regional instability, including the financial crisis in Lebanon, while the imposition of strict sanctions has also raised concern that the growing humanitarian needs will be more difficult to address. Families of the thousands of missing persons across the country are especially hard hit. There must be an end to this inhumanity and conflict. In Saudi Arabia, I am deeply concerned about the continued arbitrary detention of women human rights defenders who have demanded that Saudi Arabian women be empowered to make their own choices as equals to men. They should be released without delay. We also continue remote monitoring of the situation in Western Sahara, where we last conducted technical missions 5 years ago. Such missions are vital to identify critical human rights issues on all sides and contribute to preventing the escalation of grievances. I look forward to discussing the parameters of a new visit with all parties in the near future. Madam President, in Mali, it is vital that human rights be upheld, including during security operations, particularly given the extreme fragility of the security situation. All those illegally detained in relation with the events of 18th of August should be released, and all continuing discussions of transitional political arrangements should have the fundamental rights of all Malians at their core to ensure they work to prevent further conflict. I am concerned by the economic impact of recently adopted sanctions in a context where extreme poverty, conflicts and insecurity and climate hazards such as floods and droughts are creating great hardship and deteriorating humanitarian conditions. In Tanzania, I draw the Council's attention to increasing repression of the democratic and civic space in what is becoming a deeply deteriorated environment for human rights. With elections approaching next month, we are receiving increasing reports of arbitrary arrest and detention of civil society actors, activists, journalists, and members of opposition parties. Among the many laws that have restricted civic space online and offline in recent years, the recent Miscellaneous Amendment Act No. 3 of 2020 undermines strategic litigation and seeks to block government accountability for human rights violations. Further erosion of human rights could risk grave consequences, and I encourage immediate and sustained preventive action. I also call on the government to uphold the rights of all refugees and to ensure that any return of refugees be conducted in safety, in dignity, and on voluntary basis. In Ethiopia, despite notable efforts in recent years to bring about meaningful human rights-based reforms, the killing of an Oromo singer and activist in July triggered protests and intercommunal violence across the country. My office is ready to support a thorough, independent, impartial, and transparent investigation by the government into the killing and subsequent violence, and to support the government's ongoing legislative reforms. In Burundi, steps taken since July to arrest and prosecute members of the ruling party youth wing, senior police officers, and local administrators who have allegedly committed extortion and other crimes are encouraging. However, since elections in May, our reports continue to indicate politically motivated arrest and detention, as well as the burning of houses of opposition party members. I firmly encourage the authorities to guarantee due process and fair trials and to uphold human rights. These are the most effective way to prevent a conflict. In Somalia, I'm alarmed by an increase in reports of sexual violence against women, girls, and boys with minimal investigation. I again call on the Somali authorities to swiftly adopt the sexual offences law that was approved by Cabinet 2 years ago. I'm encouraged by last week's decision to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate the killings of journalists. It is essential that all states acknowledge and protect the right of their people to freely express their views, and that they protect journalists from arbitrary arrest, unlawful detention, harassment, intimidation, and physical attacks, including murder. The Office continues to strengthen our presence on the ground in the Sahel region, including in the context of the G5 Sahel Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law Compliance Framework. My office issued a report last month that outlines the advancement of the work with the G5 Sahel joint military forces to implement human rights compliance in their military operations. It also notes the security, political, operational, logistical, and administrative challenges that remain and outlines the way ahead for this innovative initiative. We continue to support the Joint Force in developing and strengthening its internal monitoring and accountability aimed at preventing human rights violations in the context of Joint Force operations. Recent allegations of human rights violations by armed forces in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger emphasized the urgent need for decisive action in this respect. I am concerned that the electoral process in Côte d'Ivoire has begun amid a tense political context and a backdrop of pre-existing triggers of violence related to issues of nationality, toxic regional and ethnic divides, economic inequalities, discrimination, and impunity for past crimes. The rifts in society are likely to widen with the intensification of the political campaign and hardening of positions. We also note an increase in hate speech on social media. I urge the authorities to ensure that the human rights of everyone are fully protected and respected in this important election period. Madam President, it has been more than a year since my last report on both Indian and Pakistan administered Kashmir. In Indian administered Kashmir, incidents of military and police violence against civilians continue, including use of pellet guns, as well as incidents related to militancy. Major legal changes, including to the Constitution and domicile rules, are generating deep anxiety, but the space for political debate and public participations continue to be severely restricted, particularly since new media rules have prohibited vaguely defined anti-national reporting. While I welcome the release of some political and community leaders, hundreds of people remain in arbitrary detention with many habeas corpus petitions still pending, including those of many of Jammu and Kashmir political leaders. I welcome the initiative to extend services to remote areas and the recent conditional restoration of full internet connectivity in 2 districts, which should be applied promptly to the rest of Jammu and Kashmir. On the Pakistan side, people also have limited internet access, creating difficulties in accessing education and other vital services. And I remain concerned about ongoing restrictions to the right to freedom of expression and association. My office is committed to continuing its engagement with both India and Pakistan to uphold the rights of the Kashmiri people, which is the best way to prevent further tensions and conflict. In China, my office continues to follow developments in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, particularly the impact of the national security law. Since its implementation in July, at least 24 individuals have been charged under the law. The Hong Kong authorities have consistently stated that the law is not intended to impact negatively on the peaceful exercise of human rights by Hong Kong residents. Accordingly, I would encourage the Hong Kong authorities to monitor closely the enforcement of the law by the police and the courts, and to take steps to review the law in response to any negative consequences it might have on the enjoyment of human rights. Concerning the situation of the Uyghurs, my office continues to engage with the Chinese government on the situation in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region and the impact on human rights of its policies. Following an invitation extended by the government of China, I have been discussing with the authorities the conditions of a possible visit to Xinjiang when conditions are conducive. In Sri Lanka, I'm troubled that the new government is swiftly reneging on its commitment to the Human Rights Council since it withdrew its support for Resolution 30/1. Among other developments, the proposed 20th Amendment of the Constitution may negatively impact on the independence of key institutions, including the National Human Rights Commission. The pardon given in March to a former army sergeant convicted of participating in unlawful killings, appointments to key civilian roles of senior military officials allegedly involved in war crimes and crimes against humanity, and moves within the police and judiciary toward the investigation of such crimes set a very negative trend. The surveillance and intimidation of victims, their families, human rights defenders, journalists, and lawyers should cease immediately. I encourage the Council to give renewed attention to Sri Lanka in view of the need to prevent threats to peace, reconciliation, and sustainable development. In the Philippines, we continue to work with the government, the Commission of Human Rights, civil society, and the UN system to develop follow-up actions to our June report. I'm concerned by continual reports of drug-related killings by both police and vigilantes, including during COVID-related restrictions on movement. In June, the Secretary for Justice told this Council that a review would begin into internal policy investigations of 5,655 anti-illegal drug operations where death occurred. We're seeking details from the government so we can advise and assess the review panel's scope, process, and efficacy. However, beyond this initial process, there is clearly an urgent need to revoke the policies that continue to result in killings and other human rights violations, to bring to justice the perpetrators, and to halt the use of rhetoric inciting violence against people who use or sell drugs. I'm also concerned by harassment, threats, and violence against journalists, activists, and critics. The passage of anti-terrorism legislation with many problematic provisions, and the President's announced intention to reinstate the death penalty. I encourage the Council to remain active on this situation and to support my office's continued monitoring and reporting, including to this Council, as well as our technical cooperation to implement the report's recommendations and to continue to pursue accountability. In Afghanistan, the human cost of conflict remains unacceptably high, with some 3,500 civilian casualties this year, and continuing attacks on healthcare facilities and personnel, a situation that is severely exacerbated by COVID-19. With the formal start of intra-Afghan peace talks on 12 September, I reinforced the call for an immediate reduction in violence, a humanitarian pause, and the need for victim-centered justice and inclusion of marginalized groups' concerns. These are critical to successful talks and any peace agreement. I also condemn attacks on human rights defenders, with 9 killed since the start of 2020, including members of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. I urge the government to establish an effective national protection mechanism. Madam President, the severe socioeconomic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Americas region should alert all actors to the urgency of addressing the region's profound inequalities in development. Coupled with often fragile democratic systems, it may also be a warning of potentially high risk of social unrest. The only way to build a sustainable recovery will be to address the root causes of inequality, exclusion, and discrimination. It will also be crucial to strengthen democracy and safeguard human rights in response to increasing levels of violence across the region. Alarming numbers of human rights defenders and journalists continue to be intimidated, attacked, and killed, particularly those dedicated to protecting the environment and land rights. I call on all governments to refrain from discrediting human rights defenders and journalists, putting them at further risk of attacks. I encourage decisive investigations and prosecution of perpetrators. In Colombia, my office has documented 47 killings of human rights defenders in 2020. 44 more cases are in the process of verification. In relation to recent protests in Bogota and Soacha, where excessive use of force may have killed as many as 13 people, leaving more than 300 injured, including 77 with gunshot wounds, my office is verifying the cases and has offered technical assistance on democratic and human rights-based policing of protest. The 2016 peace agreement opened a new chapter for all Colombians and should be fully implemented to prevent further violence and human rights violations and abuses. In Honduras, attacks on and violent death of LGBTI persons continue to increase. Since the beginning of the state of emergency in mid-March, OHCHR Honduras has documented 7 killings of trans women. 3 of them occurred in July alone. In both these countries, I welcome our continued engagement with the authorities to strengthen accountability. In Mexico, at least 4 journalists and 7 human rights defenders have been killed in 2020. I welcome our collaboration with authorities to improve the effectiveness of the National Protection Mechanism for human rights defenders and journalists. In Brazil, we're receiving reports of rural violence and evictions of landless communities, as well as attacks on human rights defenders and journalists, with at least 10 killings of human rights defenders confirmed this year. The continued erosion of independent bodies for the consultation and participation of communities is also worrying. I call on the authority to take strong measures to ensure that all decision-making is grounded in the contribution and needs of all people in Brazil. Also in Brazil, as well in Mexico, El Salvador, and elsewhere, we are seeing increased involvement of the military in public affairs and law enforcement. While I acknowledge the challenging security context, any use of the armed forces in public security should be strictly exceptional with effective oversight. In the United States, the shooting of Jacob Blake last month in Kenosha, Wisconsin, by a police officer employing apparently excessive force, and details that have emerged regarding the death of Daniel Prude in Rochester, New York, bring home yet again the need for urgent and profound action to combat systemic racism and racial discrimination in policing and across society. The absence of accountability for many prior killings underscores the gravity of this crisis. Many commitments to reform were made by cities and police following the killing of George Floyd in May, including by law enforcement agencies in Kenosha. Those work needs to be matched by real change to create an environment in which African Americans feel they are protected by law enforcement and the state. I will be speaking later in this session about our follow-up to the Council's Resolution 43/1. Excellencies, as you are all aware, the decline in payments of assessed contributions to the UN budget has meant that my office, like the entire UN Secretariat, has not received all of the approved funds for our activities this year. Furthermore, in an effort to contain or reduce expenditures, the Secretary General initiated in April a freeze on recruitment to fill vacant staff positions using the regular budget. Accordingly, a number of reports and related activities mandated by the Council have not received the necessary funds to enable the Office to complete the required work. This situation has been the topic of several recent briefings organized by the President of the Council, as well as ongoing discussion of my office with the Controller in New York. As it is likely that these difficulties may persist into next year, we will continue to keep you informed of developments that may further impact on our work. Madam President, at this critical moment in world history, with poverty and tensions shooting up and a sharp decline in many people's hope for a better life, human rights norms provide a tested guidance that can help states de-escalate grievances, deliver appropriate protection, establish a sound foundation for development and security, and ensure justice, freedom, and rights. Humanity has faced many crises. I'm convinced that together we can weather the current challenges and that our societies can emerge better able to prevent injustice. It is time to rise onto the occasion. Thank you, Madam President. Now I'm going to do the oral update on the situation of Nicaragua. I will do in Spanish. Desde mi última actualización oral sobre Nicaragua en julio pasado.
In the recent presentation on the situation in Nicaragua, no progress was achieved despite the willingness of the authorities to tackle the structural problems which are at the origins of the problems of starting in 2018. We have seen cases of intimidation against journalists, students, human rights advocates, peasants, and so forth. We continue now to see attacks on the life of individuals, such as by the law enforcement officials.
Armed groups need to be dismantled. As I've warned on a number of times, the amnesty law has favoured or fostered the impunity of human rights violators. According to civil society organisations, 94 people perceived as opponents, including 4 women, continue to be arbitrarily deprived of liberty, accused of ordinary crimes. Recently, some of them needed to be hospitalised because of their health. I urge the government to release all persons deprived of their liberty when they've been detained because of demonstrations or for criticising the government. This would amount a significant step towards the restoration of rights and the reduction of current polarisation in the country. Furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic is still affecting a whole range of rights, including economic, social and cultural rights. ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, is forecasting that the economy of the country shall be shrinking by 8.3% this year, with a rise of poverty rates amounting to about 5%, and unemployment is also going to rise. The state's response includes violations of the freedom of expression and dismissal of medical staff must become more transparent, and information must be disseminated. The organisation reported an increase in femicide. 50 femicides were registered on the 31st of August 2020, as compared to 44 registered at the same date last year. Furthermore, 68 attempted femicides were documented, as compared to 52 at the same date in 2019. Furthermore, the majority of the recommendations that I made in my September 2019 report, including those on electoral and institutional reform still have not been implemented, which has given rise to the ongoing existence of impunity and to new violations. I urge once again the government to implement those recommendations, and in particular in the light of the elections planned for November 2021. I also urge the government to renew effective cooperation with my office, including through authorising a country visit in the light of the fact that a report needs to be prepared for this council. Now,
hacer el oral update de Venezuela.
oral situation in Venezuela. Madam President, Excellencies, I'm delighted to present to you this update of the cooperation and technical assistance between my office and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This is pursuant to HRC/42/42.4. On the 23rd of September, I will be addressing the human rights situation in the country. A year after having signed the MOU, my office has strengthened its presence in Venezuela. Since my last oral update, we've made progress in technical cooperation in areas such as the review of police protocols on the use of force and a diagnosis of those factors that have an impact on overcrowding in remand centres or pre-trial centres. We've also made some progress in the exchange of information on individual cases and human rights situations, highlighting the responses received recently on some cases, such as the making it possible for inmates to remain in telephone contact with their relatives once visits were suspended because of COVID-19. The Attorney General ratified his commitment to make progress in the investigation of 58 alleged cases of extrajudicial killings by the forces of security and 35 cases of deaths documented by my office in the context of demonstrations because of the pandemic. The visit of the Special Rapporteur on Universal Coercive Measures, or UCMs, has been rescheduled for January 2021, and we shall be advocating in favour of these. There being 2 additional special procedure visits next year. With the recent visit of my team to the Santa Ana prison in Táchira, since we signed the MOU, my office has carried out 15 visits to 14 custodial facilities, demonstrating the role that my team is playing on the ground with respect to detained persons and their relatives. I highlight the recent visit of my team last week. My team visited last week the main detention centres of the CIBIM and the DGCIM in Caracas, during which we were able to meet confidentially with a total of 39 people linked to significant cases in full implementation of the MOU. These visits amount to a quantitative step forward. I trust that this constructive practice will continue and will serve to improve the detention conditions of inmates, and that we'll be able to visit other prisons. I take note of the decision of the government to make it possible for Juan Requenses to have house arrest instead of being incarcerated, and to pardon another 110 people. We hope that this will contribute to the widening of the democratic space. Finally, we would like to inform you that we've ratified with the government the renewal of the Memorandum of Understanding for another year. The new agreement includes the multiplying by 3 of the number of human rights officials in the country with greater legal autonomy, as well as the formalisation of an information exchange mechanism on individual cases. I trust that we'll be able to continue to make progress towards the establishment of an office in Venezuela as the situation calls for and as most of our interlocutors are asking. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, High Commissioner, says the President.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as announced earlier already, we will now watch a video message by Her Excellency Mrs. Maurice Payne, who is the Minister for Women and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Australia.
Thank you, Madam President, High Commissioner, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. COVID-19 is challenging the international system and all of our countries in truly unprecedented ways. This pandemic reminds us that human rights are fundamental and central to all aspects of national and international governance. This is something I know the High Commissioner is focused on, and I thank her for her leadership on the human rights dimensions of COVID-19. COVID-19 has underscored the fact that governments and international institutions, like the UN Human Rights Council, need to find ways to balance different rights. For instance, between public health and upholding civil and political rights. Human rights are not peripheral to the COVID response. Indeed, they must be central to our debates and our decision-making. As the world faces this economic and social crisis, Australia firmly believes that nations that uphold principles domestically are more likely to cooperate in ways that promote the common good, respecting fundamental human rights and freedoms and building them into the fabric of society, making the world safer and more secure. We know, unfortunately, that some countries are invoking and misusing the emergency measures to undermine civil and political rights. We also know the pandemic is having a significant impact on women and girls, the aged, people with disabilities, and others who may be in vulnerable situations. And we know that, in some cases, states have used COVID-19 as a pretext for reducing or removing access to justice and consular assistance for people in detention. In truth, and Australia's experience and that of others demonstrates this, a strong focus on promoting and protecting human rights makes response and recovery efforts more effective and more sustainable. It is equally important to ensure that the multilateral system is strong and effective, especially when it comes to institutions, rules and norms relating to human rights. COVID-19 is part of this, but we must also acknowledge that some institutions were not delivering effectively on their mandates before the pandemic, and that some states actively work against the norms and values that underpin the global order, including the international human rights system. To this end, Australia continues to work to ensure international institutions are fit for purpose, effective, transparent, and most importantly, accountable to member states. Australia has worked hard during our term on the Council to oppose efforts that undermine long-established human rights. As a proud liberal democracy, we believe in the indivisibility, the universality, and the inalienability of individual rights. We were proud to lead a new resolution at the last session, reaffirming the importance of respect for all human rights. Australia is also proud of how we've delivered on other priorities for our term on the Council. On gender equality, we have consistently advocated for the rights of women and girls, especially for an end to gender-based violence and discrimination, the promotion of women's economic empowerment, and women's meaningful participation in decision-making. We have championed equal rights for LGBTI persons. We have been pleased to lead the Council's action on national human rights institutions, to advocate for the protection of human rights defenders, and to support opportunities for civil society to engage in Council's processes. We have also been clear and consistent in raising our voice to champion the rights to freedom of expression, media freedom and freedom of religion or belief, to promote the rights of Indigenous persons, and to oppose the death penalty in all circumstances for all people. We understand the importance of working on these issues both inside and outside the Council. We've joined groups such as the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and the International Religious Freedom Alliance. We have also focused on holding other Council members to account in line with the higher level of scrutiny and accountability that membership entails. And we have been clear and consistent in raising human rights concerns. More remains to be done to address these, including concerning reports of repressive measures enforced against Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang, the ongoing conflict, restricted humanitarian access, the need for accountability for violations in Rakhine and elsewhere in Myanmar, and legislation related to national security on Hong Kong, which has eroded rights and freedoms guaranteed to the people on Hong Kong. We see the systematic violations of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the erosion of democratic institutions in Venezuela through the corruption of judicial and electoral processes, and the horrific humanitarian toll of conflict in Yemen and Syria. As our first term on the Council draws to a close, we are pleased to see its membership diversify, especially to include more nations, now 3 from the Pacific. While we fully comprehend the gravity of the challenges posed to the international human rights system, Australia reiterates its firm and enduring support for the Human Rights Council. In 2021 and beyond, Australia will continue to play an active role in the Council. We will be guided by our commitment to strengthening the international human rights system and to upholding and protecting universal human rights.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We'll now very briefly make the technical preparations necessary for the enhanced interactive dialogue on the report of the High Commissioner on the situation of human rights of Rohingya Muslims and other minorities in Myanmar. No, colleagues, please, we will now start the enhanced interactive dialogue on the report of the High Commissioner on the situation of human rights of Rohingya Muslims and other minorities in Myanmar, pursuant to Resolution 42/3. And it is my honor to welcome our distinguished presenters, again, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mrs. Michelle Bachelet. The other panelists, I understand, will participate via video. His Excellency Mr. Kiao Motoon, Permanent Representative of Myanmar to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, and Mrs. Kin Omar, Chair of the Advisory Board of Progressive Voice. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes, and I start by giving the floor to the High Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam President. Excellencies, I'm pleased to participate with my distinguished fellow panelists in this discussion of Myanmar, pursuant to Resolution 42/3. As requested, you have before you a report by the Office. With elections approaching in early November, this is a key moment for the assessment of Myanmar's progress on human rights, including areas where action should be taken by the next government. 3 years have passed since the military operations in Rakhine created a terrible human rights crisis. The situation of many hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees and internally displaced people remains unresolved. In 2019, the fact-finding mission in Myanmar concluded that Myanmar incurred state responsibility under the Prohibition Against Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity, as well for other violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. This Council and the General Assembly also emphasized the call for accountability, but regrettably no concrete measures have been taken. National initiatives, including secretive and selective court-martials and the National Commission of Inquiry, have been inadequate and fallen short of international standards. I continue to encourage the government of Myanmar to cooperate fully with international judicial and investigative bodies to ensure that justice is delivered and support the transitional justice processes which are vital to sustainable peace. Currently, people from the Rakhine, Chin, Moro, Danyet, and Rohingya communities are increasingly affected by the armed conflict in Rakhine and Chin states, including through disappearances and extrajudicial killings of civilians, massive civilian displacement, arbitrary arrest, torture and death in custody, and the destruction of civilian property. Civilian casualties have also been increasing. In some cases, they appear to have been targeted or attacked indiscriminately, which may constitute further war crimes or even crimes against humanity. It is troubling that a number of satellite images and eyewitness accounts indicate that areas in northern Rakhine have been burned in recent months. I know that the government has contested this based on its own review of satellite data. This only underscores the need for independent, on-the-ground investigation. Government administrators are reclassifying areas where Rohingya villages were previously located, removing the names of villages from official maps and potentially altering how the land may be used. This should end immediately, and the prior situation should be restored. Such acts re-victimize those who have been forced to flee and could prevent Rohingyas from returning to their homes, reclaiming their rights, and rebuilding their lives. I'm also concerned that they risk destroying evidence relevant to determining legal responsibility for acts committed during military operations both before and after 2017. I further regret that the complex travel authorization process obstructs access for humanitarian actors. Myanmar has been fortunate to experience low levels of contagion of COVID-19, but the recent outbreak in Rakhine is cause for concern. The social and economic impact of the pandemic has been devastating for workers and migrant returnees. I encourage the government to boost equal access to health services and redouble its social protection efforts with international support and tripartite cooperation and dialogue. The November elections are an important opportunity for all parties to demonstrate their commitment to democratic norms. The current situation is disappointing. The vast majority of Rohingyas will be prevented from participating in the elections since they have effectively been stripped of their previously recognized rights to vote and stand for office. Instances of hate speech, including Islamophobic messages, are rampant. I'm also alarmed at continuing crackdowns on human rights defenders, journalists, and critics of the governments and army. And several laws related to the democratic space which fall short of international standards continue to be used, despite recommendations that they be reformed. Excellencies, Myanmar has repeatedly stated that it wishes to resolve the Rohingya crisis and ensure the Rohingya can return to their places of origin in dignity and safety. Action must now be taken to properly remedy the serious violations the Rohingyas have suffered and include them into the life of their country. Given Myanmar's stated commitment to democracy, I also encourage the government to remove the barriers that impede democratic freedoms and undermine the equal enjoyment of human rights by all in Myanmar. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Madam High Commissioner. And we will now watch a video statement by His Excellency Mr. Kyo Mo-Toon.
Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, today the world is still facing unprecedented challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. It continues to have devastating effects on almost all countries. In Myanmar, active participation and constant cooperation of the public are vitally important to prevent the outbreak of the pandemic. Therefore, the continued awareness campaign for compliance with COVID-19 health guidelines had been conducted in various ways. The State Councillor herself regularly conveys such messages to the people through radio, TV, and Facebook. One, responding to the pandemic, the government took a whole-of-nation approach and laid down the principle of leaving no one behind, covering all vulnerable communities, including IDPs. Yet, after weeks of no community transmission of the COVID-19 cases, the surge of new cases in recent days throughout the country is alarming. The government, together with people, are doubling their efforts for containment of the pandemic. Taking this opportunity, I wish to thank our friends and partners, including the UN, for their assistance in our efforts to fight against COVID-19. Madam President, the pandemic has exacerbated the multiple challenges we face in our efforts for building a democratic federal union. With the pronouncement of making changes since the day one in its office, the present civilian government has pursued utmost efforts for making all possible changes towards a democratic state. Many positive changes had been achieved to its political, socio-economic and human rights landscape throughout the country. Madam President, sustainable peace is a common desire of the people of Myanmar. Since the first Union Peace Conference held in 2016, several principles and agreements were adopted as parts of the UN Accord. The recent fourth session of the Union Peace Conference held last month has demonstrated a significant achievement by signing of Part 3 of the Union Accord, a crucial step for establishing a democratic federal union. Madam President, the issue of Rakhine poses huge challenge for the government. It is complex and delicate. Priority has been given to find a sustainable solution. Accordingly, concrete steps have been taken. Immediately after taking office, the government formed the Central Committee for the Implementation of Peace, Stability and Development in Rakhine State. Subsequently, the Advisory Commission led by Dr. Kofi Annan was set up. Within few weeks of the establishment of the Commission, the ASA conducted terrorist attack against police outposts in northern Rakhine in October 2016. Within 24 hours of submission of the report of Commission to the government, the ASA again launched the coordinated terrorist attacks against security outposts in northern Rakhine in August 2017. These terrorist attacks were deliberate attempts to derail our efforts to find everlasting solution to the issue of Rakhine, and it triggered the current humanitarian crisis. We fully share the concern over all affected communities. Commitments of repatriation is our priority. It has to be pursued in accordance with the bilateral agreements between Myanmar and Bangladesh. The challenge has been further compounded by the increased fighting between military and the AA. With the assistance of WFP and ICRC, as well as local NGOs, humanitarian assistance is provided to the affected people. I would like to reiterate again that Myanmar is willing and able to address the issue of accountability. The government has been taking necessary action based on the recommendation contained in the report of the Independent Commission of Inquiry submitted to the President in January 2020. Myanmar has been working closely with UNHCR, UNDP, as well as with ASEAN to facilitate the implementation of the bilateral agreements between Myanmar and Bangladesh on the repatriation, resettlement, and development of returnees. Part of our efforts for creating conducive environment, the Social Cohesion Township Model Project is being implemented. Friendly bazaars are also open in many townships. More than 35 youth camps had been organized. An anti-hate speech campaign was conducted. Madam President, in conclusion, many challenges remain in our efforts towards a democratic federal union. Although many positive changes took place in the last 4.5 years in Myanmar, we are resolute to overcome these long and complex challenges with our concerted efforts. No one cares the prosperity of Myanmar than its people. The people of Myanmar have desire to make positive changes for the country. People can express their desire through the forthcoming general elections. With the desire of the people, the present government will continue making changes toward a democratic federal union. Enabling the government to do so, it is important that the continued support from within and abroad be extended to Myanmar. Hence, exerting undue political pressure on Myanmar should be avoided. Instead, the international community should render genuine cooperation, constructive engagement, and helping hands to Myanmar. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And we will now watch a video statement from Mrs. Kin Omar.
Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, Excellencies, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Kin Omar. I'm the chairperson of the Advisory Board of Progressive Voice, a local Myanmar human rights research and advocacy organization. I'd like to call the Council's attention to the grave human rights situation in Myanmar. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic and the UN Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire, the civil war in Myanmar has reached an intensity not seen in decades. In August, the government held a peace conference, but it remains non-inclusive and genuine steps towards peace have not been taken. The failure of the peace process is marked by the ongoing grave international crimes that continue to be committed throughout Myanmar, particularly in Rakhine State, by the same perpetrators that committed genocide against the Rohingya. Yet no one is being held to account, and the Myanmar military continues to act with total impunity. As the UN fact-finding mission on Myanmar has repeatedly said, domestic accountability in Myanmar is not possible. An estimated 350,000 people are displaced in Rakhine, Chin, Kachin, and Shan states. In Rakhine State alone, the total number of IDPs has reached over 200,000. Their situation is exacerbated by the restrictions enacted in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Without ending the armed conflict, the government's supposed comprehensive pandemic response plan is unrealistic. Conflict-related violations, including indiscriminate shelling of villages, continue to mount in Rakhine State under the cover of internet restrictions that has lasted over a year. At least 145 deaths and 308 injured have been documented since January. As recently as September 8, 5 civilians, including 2 children, were killed by the Tamados artillery shelling over Nyangan village in Yibong Township, even though there were no fighting in the area. This has sparked protest in Rakhine, Mandalay, and Karenni. In response, the government is using COVID restrictions as an excuse to crack down on their freedom of expression. 6 students have been charged and arrested. Of particular concern, reported cases of rape of ethnic Rakhine women points to the Myanmar military's ongoing use of rape as a weapon of war. Recently in Ratheda, 3 Myanmar soldiers gang-raped 36-year-old mother of 4 and attempted to rape her daughter. The military and the government denied it at first. Last week, the soldiers confessed, and the military said they will handle according to military law. But accountability and justice for crimes of this nature are seldom reached. The government continues to target activists, human rights defenders, and media to silence their voices. According to local civil society organization ATHAN, repressive laws, including the telecommunications law and the counterterrorism law, have been used against 1,051 individuals in 539 lawsuits under the NLD-led government. Ethnic media and activist websites have also been blocked. While democratic space shrinks, hate speech has escalated to dangerous heights. Hate speech has been systematically promoted and disseminated by powerful interests such as the military, often with overt support from the government. The upcoming 2020 elections present increasing challenges. Rohingyas are disenfranchised from voting or standing for elections, and there is a large population, Muslims, refugees, and IDPs, who will also be unable to vote. We are concerned that the Union Election Commission may not be able to facilitate free and fair elections. 3 years passed since the genocide of the Rohingya, yet there has been no justice or accountability and no sign of their safe return home. Those who remain in Rakhine continue to suffer from apartheid-like conditions. Myanmar's democratic transition has been plagued by old and new crises that need serious attention, concerted effort, and action by the international community. This must include cutting business ties with the military conglomerates MEC and MEHL, and a moratorium on arms transfer to Myanmar. In conclusion, I'd like to call on the Council to ensure the implementation of the recommendations made by the FFM and former Special Rapporteur Ms. Yang Hee Lee. I urge the UN to implement the recommendations of Rosenthal report with meaningful participation of Myanmar civil society without fear of reprisals. As the report concludes, member states also bear part of the responsibility for the UN's systemic failure and its horrific consequences that persist. We call on states and the Security Council to refer Myanmar to the ICC or to establish an ad hoc tribunal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. I now invite interested delegations to ask questions to the presenters and make comments on their statements. I would like to remind you that the speaking time limit is 1 minute and 30 seconds for state members of the Council, observer states, and other observers, the same for everybody. The list of speakers is now closed, and we start with the list of speakers, and number 1 on my list is the European Union.
Thank you, Madam President, and the European Union thanks the High Commissioner for her report. Accountability is absolutely necessary for the victims and ultimately also for reconciliation and peace. In this respect, the EU takes note of the work by the IIMM and also the proceedings of the ICC and the ICJ. The EU urges the armed forces to implement an unconditional ceasefire and commit to an all-inclusive peace process, and we urge for the elections to be held peacefully and call on the government to address access to information, freedom of expression and disenfranchisement of minority communities in the run-up to the elections. Also, hate speech should be addressed. The fact-finding mission issued findings on economic interests of the military, and it is an important body of evidence. In this respect, the European Union has prolonged sanctions against 14 individuals. In accordance with the guiding principles on business and human rights, the EU urges companies to conduct due diligence when investing in Myanmar. The fact-finding mission also concluded systematic use of sexual and gender-based violence against women, girls, boys, men and transgender people. The EU urges Myanmar to ensure accountability for all such acts which are in blatant violation of international law. Madam High Commissioner, how could the Council continue to monitor such critical issues and ensure follow-up on the recommendations made? I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I give the floor to Pakistan on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Thank you, Madam President. The OIC thanks the High Commissioner for her report. 3 weeks back, we marked 3 years of the brutal wave of systematic violence against the Rohingya purposefully unleashed by Myanmar. The FFM, established by this Council, concluded that the serious violations it had documented amounted to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The OIC reiterates its strong support to all international criminal justice and judicial mechanisms, including the ICJ. We hope that the independent mechanism for Myanmar would be able to ensure that no perpetrator remains unidentified and unrecorded. The OIC deeply regrets that while we are seeking accountability and justice for the Rohingya, Myanmar continues violence against them in various forms, even at the time of COVID-19. We further deplore that the Rohingya have been targeted in racist terms as Bengali immigrants living illegally in Myanmar and in Islamophobic terms as a source of violent Islamic extremism. The OIC expresses further concerns that a significant number of displaced Rohingyas remain trapped in a no-man's land along the border. They are prevented from returning to their villages in Myanmar. That is one further indication of Myanmar's utter insincerity with regard to the commencement of repatriation. The OIC once again urges Myanmar to end violence, protect the Rohingyas, grant citizenship to them, alleviate their sufferings, address the root causes, create conducive environment to ensure safe, voluntary and dignified return, start repatriation and forge a durable solution. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I give the floor to Jordan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السيد الرئيس.
In the name of God, the compassionate and the merciful. Madam President, we have taken note of the report of the High Commissioner. We'd like to thank her for her efforts to fulfill the mandate which the Council entrusted to her. The report attests to the fact that there are a number of flaws and human rights violations committed in Myanmar. Despite the irrefutable evidence we have, the perpetrators continue to deny the fact that there is violations of human rights in Myanmar. This at a time where reality demonstrates that the ferocious and violent acts against Rohingyas are taking place, and they amount to crimes punishable under international law, crimes which have caused hundreds of thousands of people to take exile in Bangladesh. The government of Myanmar must shoulder its full responsibility in the face of these violations and must also guarantee the return of refugees back to their homes in Myanmar. And we appeal to the international community to shoulder its humanitarian and moral responsibility to preserve those human rights and the right to freedom of religion. We pay tribute to Bangladesh. Bangladesh is hosting a huge number of refugees and they're cooperating with the international organizations. We call for international efforts to be brought together in a synergy so that peace can come back to this region through an immediate cessation of violence and shedding of blood. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I give the floor to France.
Madame la Haute Commissaire.
Madam High Commissioner, I would like to thank you for the presentation of this new report, which once again, sadly, attests to the fact that the Rohingya and other minorities in Burma are in a dire situation. We are very concerned about the humanitarian and human rights situation in Burma in the context of a huge rise of COVID-19 cases in the country, especially in Rakhine State, where problems are continuing to exist. In this context, we must allow unfettered access of humanitarian aid to all of the territory. We appeal to the Burman authorities to counter impunity under international law standards and guarantee a safe, dignified, voluntary and sustainable return of Rohingya refugees pursuant to the declaration of the President of the Security Council. Furthermore, Burma must endeavour to implement the ICJ interim measures issued on the 23rd of January 2020. We support the peace process and the democratic process launched in particular through the organisation of free, peaceful, independent, transparent and inclusive elections set to occur on the 8th of November. We have a question, Madam High Commissioner, for you. What short-term action can be considered to help displaced populations, in particular the Rohingyas, as the health situation is deteriorating in the Rakhine State? Thank you very much. I give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Japan shares the concerns of the international community regarding the human rights and humanitarian situation in Rakhine State and the displaced persons who fled to Bangladesh. The situation must be improved as soon as possible. Japan highly commends Bangladesh for generously accepting the displaced persons. Early voluntary and dignified repatriation is important, and to this end, a conducive environment must be realized. In this regard, Japan will continue to support efforts by Myanmar and Bangladesh. Japan stresses the importance of advancing investigation and prosecution of alleged cases of human rights violations in Rakhine State in a transparent and speedy manner by Myanmar. The country's own efforts to hold those responsible to account will also contribute to steadily implementing the ICJ order on provisional measures. The international community should continue to urge Myanmar to take concrete steps in order to consolidate democracy and to promote and protect human rights. Equally critical is for Myanmar to provide a thorough explanation of its own efforts to the international community. In order to ensure that the next general elections in Myanmar are free and fair, Japan intends to provide as much support as possible, including by sending election observers. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I give the floor to Indonesia.
Madam President, the human rights and humanitarian situation of the Rohingyas remain a great concern. A prolonged situation is a clear sign that finding an early, comprehensive and sustainable solution is a must. And the Council, in its part, should continue to call all relevant parties to take concrete steps to address the root causes of the plight of the Rohingyas. Just last week, Indonesia once again, on the basis of humanitarian consideration, disembarked almost 300 Rohingyas on a boat that has been distressed at sea for months. Most of them are women and children. Currently, they are in temporary shelter, in which the local authorities, civil society, and UNHCR are working together to ensure their health, safety, and well-being. We, in this regard, wish to reiterate the importance and urgency of our efforts in ensuring safe, voluntary, dignified return of the Rohingyas, as well as the undertaking of burden sharing and shared responsibilities among relevant countries. Madam President, as a fellow of ASEAN member state, Indonesia will continue to support Myanmar in their roadmap to democracy and wishes the upcoming November general election could lead to the enhancement of the full enjoyment of human rights for all people in Myanmar. And I thank you, Mr. President. Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I give the floor to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Madam President. We have taken note of the report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We welcome the efforts made by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to bring us up to date as to what has happened recently. We are concerned about the fact that the report talks about serious human rights violations against the innocent Rohingyas and against other minorities in Myanmar, as a result of which we could speak of genocide in the area and unprecedented violence, untold violence. We in Saudi Arabia attach a lot of importance to these facts. We appeal to the international community to take expeditious action to protect the Rohingya minority in Myanmar so that this minority can recover without discrimination its rights. My government reiterates its appeal to the international community for it to redouble its efforts to find a comprehensive, peaceful solution to what is happening in Myanmar, which means a dignified and expeditious and safe return for the Rohingyas who are currently in Bangladesh. We hope that this minority shall receive support from the international community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I give the floor to Libya.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank the High Commissioner for her report. We agree with her that we should ask the fact-finding mission to monitor the implementation of the recommendations to protect Rohingya Muslims. We condemn violations against the Rohingyas in terms of genocide, ethnic cleansing, hate speech against this minority. In this respect, we would like to thank Bangladesh for having hosted these hordes of Rohingya refugees, because this is an almost unbearable burden for Bangladesh, and this in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Commissioner has asked that the recommendation in the report be implemented, in particular the extension of the ceasefire, the rapid implementation of the investigations with regards to the allegations of international humanitarian law, a dignified return for all Rohingya displaced persons pursuant to international standards. We support all of her claims. The report also has pointed to the role that could and should be played by the international community to implement all of these measures. Today, we must guarantee the repatriation of the Rohingya home in a dignified and safe, secure environment. Thank you.
Give the floor to Senegal.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Thank you very much, Madam President. Senegal aligns itself with the declarations made by our groups. My delegation would like to thank the High Commissioner for the oral update on the activities conducted under the mandate and for the assessment of the changing human rights situation of the Rohingya Muslims and other minorities in Myanmar. The human rights situation of the Rohingyas continues to be punctuated by systematic violence against this minority. Despite condemnations, we must note that since the beginning of the crisis, a great deal of time has passed without any tangible progress to put an end to the tragedy. We are concerned by the worsening of the security and humanitarian situation of the Rohingya, and we hope that the next elections in November 2020 will be an important stage, strengthening democracy in Myanmar, allowing all parts of the population, including the Rohingya, to participate, as well as other minorities. However, despite the interim measures of the ICJ to prevent the destruction of evidence and preserve it, the ultimate goal remains allowing refugees to return home. To achieve this goal, major efforts for reconciliation, restoring the rule of law, and reconstruction are still necessary to allow a dignified, voluntary and sustainable return of the Rohingyas. My delegation believes that the cessation of violence against civilian populations who have been forced massively to flee and the need for the security forces of Myanmar to assure their protection will be sufficient to allow a safe humanitarian access. Thank you.
Next speaker is Iraq.
Madam President, maybe there is a technical problem because we requested the Secretariat to update it and they didn't. We are not registered on this anymore. Thank you.
Okay, sorry for that. So I give the floor to Australia.
Thank you, Madam President, and we thank the High Commissioner for her update. Australia remains deeply concerned by ongoing conflict in Rakhine and Chin states, as well as other protracted crises in Myanmar, noting the disproportionate impact on the most vulnerable, including women, children and people with disabilities. We continue to urge the protection of civilians, compliance with international law, unimpeded humanitarian access and a cessation of hostilities. Australia welcomes the ceasefire extensions following the recent Union Peace Conference and urges the inclusion of Rakhine and Chin states. We encourage all parties to engage in constructive dialogue to advance the national peace process. We recognise the Myanmar government's efforts to combat COVID-19. It is vital that accountability for human rights violations is realised for there to be any durable solution to the Rakhine crisis and to bring justice for the Rohingya and other minorities in Myanmar. Australia acknowledges recent court-martial proceedings as recommended by Myanmar's Independent Commission of Inquiry and urges transparency through the publication of charges, appeals, outcomes and, where relevant, sentencing. Australia continues to urge Myanmar to engage with international accountability mechanisms as they carry out their mandates. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And the next speaker is China.
Madam President, Myanmar has made positive progress in developing its economy, improving livelihood and promoting internal peace process. China hopes that Myanmar will realize stability and development, which is in the interest of Myanmar, but also the common interest of countries in the region. China will continue to support Myanmar in taking a development path in light of its national situation. China has always advocated constructive dialogue and cooperation to address human rights differences. We are against the politicization of human rights issues. The international community should respect Myanmar's sovereignty, recognize efforts and achievements by the government in promoting and protecting human rights, and understand difficulties and challenges facing Myanmar. We also call on the international community to provide constructive help to Myanmar and Bangladesh in order to create a good external environment for the implementation of repatriation agreement between the two countries and to launch such process for the first returnees at the earliest. The HRC's relevant discussions should help to realize stability and development in Myanmar, be conducive to the settlement of the Rakhine issue, and not the opposite. I thank you, Madam President.
And I give the floor to Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam President. We endorse the OIC statement. The reports of the fact-finding mission were a testimony of heart-rending account of horrendous crimes purposefully unleashed by Myanmar authorities against the Rohingya. Indiscriminate killings coupled with large-scale gang rape was the hallmark of the brutality. We regret again that there has been no tangible progress in Myanmar towards accountability for such barbaric acts. We urge Myanmar to cooperate and engage meaningfully with all international justice and accountability mechanisms, including the ICC and ICJ. We wish to remind the Council of the FFM's deep concern about the gravity of the Rohingya crisis with wide-ranging implications in the region. It may lead to pockets of radicalism, hence there is a high possibility of uncertainty which may frustrate the hope for a peaceful, secure and stable region. We solicit sustained support from the international community so that forcibly displaced Rohingyas can return to Myanmar and be resettled and reintegrated there in safety, security and dignity. Certainly, once they return, they could become contributing members in the development of Myanmar. But unfortunately, instead of creating a conducive environment, Myanmar continues to ramp up violence in Rakhine State. Lastly, we join Madam High Commissioner in calling on Myanmar to immediately implement all FFM recommendations. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Y doy la palabra a Venezuela.
Venezuela, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam President. We recognise the complexity of the situation, and we continue to support the efforts of Myanmar in seeking peace and sustainable development for its people in full adherence to international law. Myanmar has been cooperating with the United Nations. We welcome that. We have updated information on the progress made in the field, despite the impact of the pandemic. Venezuela will continue to support efforts made by Myanmar in promoting and protecting human rights, and in particular, the rights of vulnerable minorities, such as the Rohingya minority. The stability of the state of Rakhine is crucial for Myanmar as it transitions towards democracy. National reconciliation, lasting peace, democracy, human rights, and sustainable and inclusive development are interrelated completely and must be looked at if you want to build a Myanmar which is democratic and federal. We'll continue calling for peace efforts and reconciliation in Myanmar and the protection of human rights, and in particular for vulnerable populations such as working people. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We listen to another video message by Malaysia.
Thank you. Malaysia thanks the High Commissioner for her report on the situation of the Rohingyas and aligns itself with the statement of the OIC. The High Commissioner's report further reaffirms the dire situation of the Rohingyas, and Malaysia remains concerned. The prolonged plight of the Rohingyas can only be resolved through a lasting and sustainable solution to the Rakhine problem. We agree with the High Commissioner that accountability is crucial towards finding a just and sustainable solution to the ongoing crisis. Malaysia remains fully committed to working with relevant parties, and as a neighbor and fellow ASEAN member, reiterates its readiness to assist Myanmar in addressing the complex situation. We call on the government of Myanmar to take the following actions: full implementation of the recommendations of the Advisory Commission on the Rakhine State, take urgent and credible steps to ensure accountability, allow for greater humanitarian access in Rakhine State, and ensure concrete steps are taken for the safe, voluntary, and dignified repatriation of the Rohingyas and address the citizenship issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to India.
Madam President, we take note of the High Commissioner's report and her oral remarks. India believes that there is a need to continue constructive and fruitful engagement with Myanmar and to recognize Myanmar's efforts towards implementation of the Anand Commission recommendations. India notes Myanmar's continued engagement with the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy and the progress made on the quick impact projects under the Myanmar, UNDP and UNHCR tripartite agreement, despite the constraints of the COVID-19 pandemic. India has been following a humanitarian approach to the Rakhine issue. We have been assisting Rakhine State through the Rakhine State Development Program, which includes USD 25 million grant assistance to Myanmar over a period of 5 years to implement socio-economic projects in the region, pertaining to housing, education, power, and water supply, etc. In order to synergize our efforts with our other development partners in Myanmar, we are also working with Japan for establishing soft infrastructure. We have also implemented humanitarian measures in Bangladesh. In all 5 tranches of immediate relief assistance have been provided. We stand committed to do more. As the only land neighbor of both Bangladesh and Myanmar, India has the highest stakes and abiding interest in early resolution of the issue. We remain committed towards ensuring a safe, sustainable, and speedy repatriation of displaced persons from Rakhine State currently in Bangladesh to Myanmar, based on the understanding reached between the two countries. We will continue to support efforts in this direction. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear a video message from the Philippines.
Thank you, Madam President. The Philippines notes the report of the High Commissioner and the information provided by Myanmar on the government's efforts to address human rights issues in Rakhine and in other states. We continue to underline the needs for the reports of the OHCHR consistent with the High Commissioner's directive to uphold the highest standards of due diligence, transparency, fairness, and objectivity in its methodologies. We reiterate our position that unilateral mandates that do not enjoy the support of the concerned country are counterproductive. In these extraordinary times of grave UN liquidity crisis and pandemic disruptions and impacts, we highlight the need for the Council, the OHCHR, and the UN system to direct efforts towards fully supporting Myanmar's democratic transition process and in addressing gaps and challenges in accountability measures within the framework of its domestic processes. We note the government's efforts to address the findings and recommendations in the report of the Independent Commission of Inquiry, specifically on the pursuit of accountability for military personnel responsible for war crimes and human rights violations. The Philippines, in the context of ASEAN, stands ready to cooperate and extend any assistance to Myanmar, including strengthening of domestic judicial mechanisms. We wish to ask the High Commissioner about her views on how her office or the UN could broaden its constructive engagement with Myanmar, noting in this regard that UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on Myanmar has made significant headway in fostering constructive cooperation with the government on a broad range of issues. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель,
Madam President, we believe it is necessary to maintain a balanced, depoliticized approach in discussing ways to resolve the situation in Rakhine. We believe that the factors for resolving the situation for refugees into Bangladesh should be a part of a continuation of the cooperative procedure. The role of the international community should be to render assistance in implementing agreements on repatriation. A priority goal is a beginning of the phased process for the return of IDPs. The timeline has been broken twice already due to factors inside and outside Rakhine. The action of the tri-party agreement with China and Myanmar working together is vital, and all steps must be taken to implement the recommendations of the Council Committee on Rakhine. The role of the Special Representative of the UN should play a major role. Also, actions increasing tension as well as rhetorics should be condemned as counterproductive. We see no added value either in the so-called investigative mechanism in Myanmar. The report shows that they are simply assimilating part of the UN budget, money that could be used more constructively. Therefore, we will not enter in a dialogue with that group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Ireland.
Thank you, Madam President. Ireland aligns with the statement of the European Union and thanks the High Commissioner for her latest update. Ireland continues to be deeply concerned by reports of ongoing human rights violations in Myanmar. In particular, we are distressed by the high levels of fighting and forced displacement occurring in Rakhine and Chin states. We urge all parties to end this violence and to provide unfettered humanitarian access to all conflict-affected areas and vulnerable communities. While there remains a long road to achieve sustainable peace and national reconciliation, Ireland is encouraged by international efforts towards ensuring accountability and justice, including the ongoing processes at the IIMM, the ICJ and the ICC. We also note the general elections scheduled for November 2020 and urge the Government of Myanmar to utilise this opportunity to prove its commitment to democratic transition and the fulfilment of human rights for all persons in Myanmar. It is essential that the rights of human rights defenders and journalists are respected and protected during this period. Ireland continues to urge Myanmar to prioritise the creation of conditions conducive to the safe, voluntary, dignified and sustainable return of Rohingya refugees to their places of origin. Madam High Commissioner, given the disruption to the induction of staff to the independent investigative mechanism as a result of COVID-19, what mitigation measures will be introduced to support the important functions of this mechanism? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Madam President, the Lao thanks Madam High Commissioner for her report. We are of the view that Myanmar, like others, is a multi-ethnic city and a multi-religion country. Therefore, national reconciliation is of critical importance to the Myanmar in its democratic transition. We commend the ongoing efforts of the Myanmar government to maintain and promote sustainable peace and genuine national reconciliation and on-route development to achieve SDGs and to continue cooperation with international community, including ASEAN and UN agencies in addressing unprecedented COVID-19 in the country and humanitarian situation in Rakhine State. As for the humanitarian situation in Rakhine State, we are of the view that time and space should be given to Myanmar to resolve the issue and expedite repatriation process, as well as to bring peace and stability to all communities, including the promotion of human rights and economic development for all of its people. And this can be achieved through dialogue, constructive engagement and cooperation. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam High Commissioner, for your update. The systematic discrimination facing the Rohingya in Myanmar prevents them from living safe and dignified lives. The UK is deeply concerned by the restrictions Rohingya face in accessing healthcare. To combat the growing COVID-19 outbreak in Rakhine effectively, every person needs to be able to access medical facilities, treatment and COVID-19 testing, regardless of documentation, status, religion, nationality or race. The majority of Rohingya cannot access township hospitals where treatment for COVID-19 takes place. Instead, they often seek treatment in station hospitals or clinics. However, many of those are now closing. We urge Myanmar to allow mobile clinics so Rohingya can safely access medical services for any urgent condition. It is essential that camp-based staff and volunteers have permission to continue life-saving activities. We encourage Myanmar to restore international humanitarian agencies' access on completion of quarantine, including in conflict-affected areas. The UK also calls on the government of Myanmar to restore 3G, 4G internet services to all of Rakhine and Chin, allowing populations access to life-saving information, including on transmission prevention. Madam High Commissioner, what steps should Myanmar take to ensure the Rohingya have equitable access to healthcare during this global pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I give the floor to South Sudan. I believe they're absent, so we turn to Egypt.
Thank you, Madam President. Egypt expresses its deep concern over the grave violations of human rights against the Muslim Rohingyas in Myanmar, and we support all efforts to immediately stop this historic suffering of the Rohingya. Egypt, in this respect, at the bilateral level or through Al-Azhar al-Sharif and civil society and through the OIC and other international organizations, supports any efforts that aim at preventing the violations against Rohingyas and that led to the displacement and migration of thousands of Rohingyas. We call upon the international community to find a swift and just solution to rescue them. Egypt also supports the pivotal role undertaken by the OIC, particularly by supporting the special envoy of the organization to Myanmar. And we also stress the importance of strengthening cooperation between the OIC and other international organizations to ensure concerted international efforts to solve the problem. We finally call upon all countries concerned to continue encouraging Myanmar to engage in a dialogue to install peace and provide protection to the Rohingya Muslims and to ensure the right of return while allowing necessary humanitarian assistance to all population of the province without discrimination while reconstructing the areas that were destroyed. Thank you.
Nordic countries.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Nordic and Baltic countries. It's Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Denmark. We continue to be deeply concerned by the findings of the fact-finding mission and call on Myanmar to fully implement all its recommendations and to pursue accountability through credible, independent national and international criminal justice mechanisms. We urge Myanmar to fully comply with the ICJ provisional measures. We reiterate the need for full implementation of the Rakhine Advisory Commission's recommendations. Myanmar is undergoing a fragile democratic transition. We urge all political stakeholders in Myanmar to ensure inclusive, free, fair, and credible elections, enabling the participation of the entire electorate without discrimination. We remain concerned by the fact-finding mission's findings on the implications of hate speech and the role of private social media. We reiterate the need for consolidated solutions to online incitement to violence and hatred. Madam High Commissioner, how can the Council best support inclusive elections in Myanmar? I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I give the floor to Tunisia.
Thank you, Madam President. We would like to thank the OHCHR for the importance attached to the continued violations against the Muslim Rohingyas and other minorities in the Rakhine, despite the international efforts and the calls to put an end to the widespread violations and addressing its main reasons. The situation of human rights in Myanmar is still of grave concern, with the discrimination and violations of human rights, along with in an environment of impunity and lack of accountability. The lack of response by the government of Myanmar to these invitations and non-cooperation with human rights mechanisms can exacerbate the climate of mistrust and prevent the administration of justice while providing the necessary environment for the return of displaced persons and refugees to their homeland. Madam President, COVID-19 exacerbated the humanitarian crisis experienced by the Rohingyas. The reports are also referring to the fact that the measures to combat COVID-19 has further restricted the freedoms of this minority. We also affirm that the government of Myanmar should provide safe assistance, humanitarian assistance to the persons affected, and to cooperate with the United Nations agencies and the ICC. And President interrupts.
Madam President, Armenia is concerned about human rights violations and abuses continuing to be perpetrated in various parts of Myanmar. It is regretful that the office should have produced this report without access to the country. Armenia urges the armed organizations to heed the call of the Secretary General for a global ceasefire and thus prevent destruction of civilian objects as well as forced displacement of tens of thousands. We call upon the authorities to conduct prompt, effective, thorough, independent and impartial investigations and to hold perpetrators accountable. The establishment of the National Independent Commission of Inquiry was a step in the right direction, and we call upon the government to publicize its full report, as well as the Myanmar's May 22 report to the ICJ. The COVID-19 pandemic has heavily affected the plight of the displaced populations. We consider constraints imposed by humanitarian workers unacceptable and urge all parties to allow safe, timely and unimpeded humanitarian access. Armenia welcomes the positive steps the government of Myanmar has taken towards addressing sexual and gender-based violence, including through opening of crisis and support centers. We urge the international community to step in to support this work and help Myanmar to increase their number and accessibility. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And we now turn to the list of speakers on behalf of national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. The first organization on that list is the Asian Forum for Humane Rights and Development.
Madam President, Forum Asia welcomes the report of the High Commissioner. More than 3 years after the Myanmar military's genocidal clearance operations in Rakhine State, nearly 1 million Rohingya remain in refugee camps in Bangladesh. While Myanmar has failed to guarantee essential conditions for their voluntary, safe, dignified and sustainable return, it has also escalated the war in Rakhine State, making their return untenable and displacing the remaining Rohingya. Myanmar continues to use discriminatory laws and policies to deny Rohingya identity and right to citizenship, propagate hate speech and incitement to violence, and prevent their freedom of movement. Exclusion of Rohingya in the upcoming national elections is yet another manifestation of the systematic discrimination and persecution of Rohingya. Accountability is paramount to ensure safety, dignity, and human rights of Rohingya and other minorities. The government has not only failed to hold the military accountable, it has also actively shielded military personnel from accountability while persecuting those who advocate for international accountability. It is imperative that the international community pursues criminal accountability for genocide against Rohingya and crimes against humanity and war crimes against other ethnic minorities by referring Myanmar to the ICC or establishing an ad hoc tribunal. We call on Myanmar to repeal or review all discriminatory laws and policies in line with international standards and to guarantee full citizenship regardless of ethnicity and religion. Finally, the upcoming national elections to be credible, Myanmar should allow all ethnic minorities, including Rohingya refugees and IDPs, to take part in the elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the Lutheran World Federation.
Madam President, the Lutheran World Federation would like to thank Madam High Commissioner for her comprehensive report. The Lutheran World Federation continues to be deeply concerned by the widespread armed violence in Myanmar, which is in disregard by the parties to the conflict of the United Nations Secretary General's global call to cessation of hostilities due to the coronavirus disease pandemic. Civilian non-combatants, ethnic and religious minorities, children, women, the elderly, persons living with disabilities, and communities in rural areas have particularly borne the heavy brunt of the violence, which has left thousands of civilians dead and thousands of refugees and internally displaced persons. Madam President, the human rights and humanitarian situation is dire and has been further exacerbated by the global COVID-19 pandemic and the government's restriction to humanitarian access beyond urban areas. Moreover, the government's shutdown of internet access and mobile phones, 3G, 4G networks in some parts of the country has diminished access to information for communities to help withstand the spread of the coronavirus disease. Therefore, the Lutheran World Federation calls on the parties to the conflict in Myanmar to immediately cease fire and ensure civilian protection, and on the Myanmar authorities to investigate and provide justice and accountability for all allegations of human rights abuses and civilian atrocities in the country. Finally, the Lutheran World Federation urges the authorities to allow unfettered humanitarian access to all parts of the country to ensure affected communities receive life-saving services, as well as to restore internet, mobile phones, 3G and 4G networks so communities can have access to information to help combat the spread of the virus. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the Next Century Foundation.
Dear Madam President, the Next Century Foundation would like to request the re-enfranchisement of the Rohingya minority in time for the upcoming elections in Myanmar on November 8th of this year. At present, the Citizenship Act of 1982 prohibits some 600,000 Rohingya from legal recognition, reinforcing their marginalization. In 2010, the Rohingya were briefly enfranchised, but had to register as Bengali at the cost of their ethnic identity. The NCF notes their inability to influence legislative outcomes, as seen by the passing of the Race and Religion Protection Laws in 2014, restricting their social human rights. We welcome the subsequent military reforms induced by the 2020 ruling by the International Court of Justice in Gambia v. Myanmar, but encourage the Myanmar government to implement all aspects of the ruling. The NCF recognizes attempts made by the Myanmar government to balance the assimilation of the Rohingya with Buddhist nationalist opposition, but request more efficient efforts. We ask that Myanmar respects the right to a nationality in Article 15 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of which Myanmar is a signatory. The NCF echoes the words of UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, Fernand de Varnez, that without citizenship, people who are stateless become humans without rights. Equipping the Rohingya with their due electoral rights would facilitate greater assimilation into society, whilst drawing upon already existing mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last organization is Institut International pour les Droits et le Développement. Oh, I understand they are absent. So we have finished with the list of speakers. I now give the floor to the original speakers for their concluding remarks, and I would ask them all to stick to 2 minutes, starting with the High Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam President. There's a couple of questions I should have answer first, because many mentioned the importance of accountability and what can the Human Rights Council and the international community do about it, because we agree that accountability for grave violations of international law is a key component to prevent recurrence of violations, ensure justice and strengthen confidence of people in Myanmar authorities. It is also intimately linked to any transitional justice process, which after decades of civil war is more needed than ever. To support Myanmar authorities to fulfill its obligations and meet these challenges, the international community should support my office's ability to continue monitoring and reporting on the human rights situation in the country, continue to pursue accountability for perpetrators of crimes and human rights violations, engage with the Myanmar government to establish the necessary confidence to allow for independent monitors and investigators to enter the country, provide decisive technical support to strengthen the Myanmar judiciary's independence and performance, and support training for investigators from all communities in order to ensure skills within the country are developed and strengthened to promote justice and prevent recurrence of crimes. A couple of questions was asked on terms of health and COVID-19 and minorities, and as I mentioned in my report, we have concern for the spread of COVID-19 among minority communities, and it's needed international assistance, funding, and developing of capacity to improve access to information on COVID, support also to increase testing in vulnerable communities, and of course medical treatment for the ones who are sick, and also with all the peace initiatives and so on. And in particular, which are the steps that Myanmar could take to healthcare? First of all, lift internet lockdown and guarantee full access to information. full ceasefires and guarantees to humanitarian access and people access to health clinics, and permit access to testing and permit the flow of assistance to affected populations. And of course, we all believe that the November election need to be fair and reliable. So I think that a successful democratic transition would continue to require an elected parliament that is reflective of Myanmar's diverse population. All segments of the population, including those living in Rakhine, Chin, and Shan states, should be allowed to participate in the forthcoming elections without any form of restriction and discrimination. And I regret that no steps have been taken to reinstate the rights of the Rohingyas to vote and to stand in the election, as was the case before 2010. I also hope the election will see an increased number of women parliamentarians and women elevated into cabinet position. And finally, Madam President, my office is ready to engage with the government of Myanmar to assist it address the human rights needs discussed in this report. I know that the Myanmar government disagrees with the findings, but the best way to address issues the report raises is through engagement. And I'm renewing the offer of assistance to the government to address the root causes of human rights violations and abuses. And it means to further steps, including constitutional change to strengthen Myanmar's democracy and civilian control of the military, transitional justice and other accountability measures to end impunity, and the forging of a new national identity based on tolerance and respect for diversity. With respect to the Rohingya, this also means addressing the issue of statelessness, including by amending the 1982 citizenship law to restore their citizenships. And all, as I mentioned, all segments of the population should be allowed to participate in the forthcoming elections. And my office owes a debt of gratitude to the human rights defenders, journalists, and other civil society members, because they are people dedicated to the well-being of the country who should be protected and respected as they carry out their crucial work. I wish to finally extend my gratitude to Ambassador Kia and Ms. Keane for their participation in this enhanced interactive dialogue. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. And I now give the floor to Ambassador Kyaw Moe-Toon.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, first of all, I wish to thank the delegations who took the floor in support of Myanmar and in a constructive and objective manner. I would like to make the following points. First, national reconciliation and peace, democracy and human rights, and sustainable and inclusive development are intertwined in building democracy. Challenges we face are not single, but multiple, not simple, but complex and sensitive. Therefore, the government is addressing them in a holistic and comprehensive manner. Nothing can be set aside. Second, no one can deny that the positive changes are taking place in Myanmar. Critics may say that it is not enough. Of course, we wish to achieve our goal of creating a democratic state at once. We wish to complete the process overnight, but realizing the reality is crucial. Thorough understanding of our culture, our history, and the background and complexity of the issues are also extremely important. That appropriate time and space should be given to surely succeed the goal and fruitfully complete the process. Third, accuracy of information is essential in making a right decision. It is not acceptable that unsubstantiated and unverified allegations found their ways to the report of the UN. It will impact negatively on the image of the country concerned and on the efforts of the country to resolve the issue. Therefore, we ask the OSHA to rely on verified information. Fourth, the situation in Rakhine is complex with deep historical roots and not easy to fathom. Intercommunal tensions, lack of economic opportunities, low level of development, and other political factors constitute the suffering of many innocent people. The ongoing conflict in Rakhine State pose a challenge to the sovereignty and security of Myanmar. Hence, we believe that externalizing the issue of Rakhine is only fanning the flames of an extreme polarization, which can harm the values of peace and harmony in Myanmar. Finally, Madam President, I would like to reaffirm Myanmar's commitment that we will continue our best efforts with the strength of the people of Myanmar for achieving the goals towards a peaceful and prosperous democratic federal union. Understanding, constructive engagement, genuine cooperation of the international community towards Myanmar will be the only way forward in finding a sustainable solution to the issue of Rakhine, and will be helpful to our efforts for building a democratic federal union with sustainable peace and development. And thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I give the floor to Mrs. Kinoma.
COVID-19 cases rising in Rakhine, it is of huge importance that the government fully restores internet and immediately cease fire. We remain deeply concerned at the systemic and institutionalized policies and ongoing practices that perpetuate violations against Rohingya and other ethnic and religious minorities, and ongoing attack on human rights defenders, activists, and independent media. We reiterate our call for the urgent need for international criminal accountability in order to address justice and accountability. For this, we support the fact-finding mission's findings that domestic accountability is not possible in Myanmar. It is painfully evident to the victims and survivors that domestic justice has continued to fail them, and that such avenue for justice is nowhere near possible inside the country. One major obstacle is Myanmar's total denial. For example, Myanmar military has long used rape as a weapon of war against non-Burma ethnic communities. In spite of it being well documented by the FFM, Myanmar continues to deny that such crimes are taking place at every opportunity. Myanmar's Independent Commission of Inquiry also categorically dismissed rape and sexual violence in its final report, further emboldening the military to continue to commit these crimes with impunity. Since the genocide against the Rohingya, Myanmar has established several investigation mechanisms. All of these mechanisms were neither independent nor transparent, and none addressed the issue of justice or accountability. These domestic mechanisms proved themselves to be nothing more than a tactic to buy time, and this has delayed justice for the victims. Myanmar cannot achieve durable peace and genuine federal democracy without justice and accountability, and without ending the military's impunity. The only way to achieve this is to hold the perpetrators to account through international criminal accountability and bring military under the civilian control. I'd like to call on the Council, States, and High Commissioner to support this vital step forward. Finally, I'd like to reiterate our call on the Security Council to refer Myanmar to the ICC or to establish an ad hoc tribunal and ensure that Myanmar complies with the ICJ's provisional measures. The victims and survivors of the military's violent crimes deserve nothing less. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And this brings us to the end of this enhanced interactive dialogue. I wish to thank all the presenters for their participation. We will now stop and reconvene at 3 o'clock for the interactive dialogue on the report of the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. I wish you a nice lunch break. Goodbye, see you later. Meeting is now closed.